As the old saying goes, history is written by its victors. If this is true, we in the present, believing the history we've been taught to be an accurate reflection of the past, are living in the narratives of its authors, most as unwitting characters in a story not of our design, blindly driving the plot forward. And just as we had no say in the editing of the story arc of history, we also cannot know if the legacy we are part of is truly one belonging to history's righteous protagonists, as we are taught and like to believe about ourselves, or its villains. Thus, the truth all comes down to the veracity of the story we as a country have inherited, of which can only be verified through scrutiny. For those who live for the truth, I ask that you suppose that perhaps not all of the narratives of the history of this country that we've inherited are compatible with its facts. I ask you to wonder if maybe not all of our victories were achieved by choosing the quote-unquote just path at critical inflection points in our past, and if the politically dystopian world more and more of us witness materializing before our eyes presently is the once predictable consequence of those choices. I ask you to open your mind to the consideration that perhaps you've been indoctrinated by your government and institutions no less than Mao Zedong or Stalin or the Japanese Empire indoctrinated their own people for their own selfish ends. I ask that you consider that the story we've been told about some of our treasured historical heroes are fables, and that the messianic story of President Abraham Lincoln is one such fable. In the United States, the mainstream historical narrative on Abraham Lincoln and his actions during the Civil War is the stuff of fairy tales. It goes something like this. Abraham Lincoln was a humble, backwoods rail splitter who grew up as a lifelong opponent of slavery and a believer in equality between blacks and whites. From the time of his modest upbringing in a Midwestern log cabin, he was an exemplary boy who worked tirelessly and studied hard to fulfill his self-perceived destiny of ridding the country of this evil and making right the wrongs of America's past sins. To achieve this, he would go on to become a lawyer, then a politician, and eventually the President of the United States of America. After Lincoln was elected president, the southern states, run by aristocrats who gained obscene wealth growing and selling cotton on the backs of African slaves, knew Lincoln was going to get rid of slavery and give equality to blacks. And so, they preemptively seceded from the United States and formed the Confederate States of America. Lincoln's conviction was that preserving slavery was not an acceptable moral justification to tear the country apart, and became convinced that the only way to save the Union was to abolish the barbaric institution. And so, after a Union ship undeliberately clashed with Confederate forces in the waters near Fort Sumter, South Carolina, resulting in the Union fort being fired upon by the Confederacy, in order to end the threat of Southern aggression, Lincoln felt compelled to order a military invasion of the South, reunite the nation, and fulfill his valiant, lifelong dream of delivering the promise of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to blacks in the United States. Next, we are told, the racially tolerant northern population would heroically volunteer and shed blood to take up his cause, and ultimately, we are told, the good guys won, the bad guys were defeated, and Lincoln paid the ultimate price for black freedom with his own life at the hands of an enemy assassin. Since then, we are told, our nation has been morally indebted to the wise and benevolent 16th president to a degree virtually impossible to overstate. Of course, For any nation, historical fables are an indispensable tool in maintaining its social cohesion. They do this by immortalizing the events surrounding its ancestors in a fantastical manner that inspires the masses to perpetuate the cause of the nation. These fables seem to be the nuclei of human civilizations throughout time. For this reason, we commonly see historical figures who are far from perfect being practically sanctified, with their good qualities often exaggerated and their sins swept under the historical rug. Given the political functionality facilitated by these fables, this is understandable, even if somewhat dishonest. But when the omissions and fabrications in the story told of a celebrated figure are so egregious that it turns into uninhibited deception, completely making up the good qualities of the character and twisting the historical narrative in which they made their mark to the extent of even inverting good and evil, is it then still acceptable to substitute the lies of literary license and hyperbole for the truth? Moreover, does this kind of institutionally sanctioned propaganda erase from society the diabolical and unacknowledged yet tangible legacy it was created to conceal? Or does it repair the contemporary national fractures traced back to its origins? In an honest nation, the answer to both of these questions is no. And if we wish to be such a nation, we must interrogate the fables of our own celebrated historical achievements and the quote-unquote heroes behind them. The American Civil War was the most consequential inflection point in American history, and so when it comes to the United States, a key first step in inventorying our values and auditing our integrity is to ask questions as to whether the nationally inculcated lore about honest Abraham Lincoln and his just cause, scare quotes on both of those, is corroborated by the documented facts of the 16th president's life and matched by his statements pertaining to blacks and the civil war he allegedly waged for them. Some of the key questions are as follows.